They killed him. They killed Jesus. It was awful. The week started wonderfully. It was like a parade. We were all following him, the disciples and us women. We followed him into Jerusalem. They treated him like royalty. They were waving the palm branches and laying them on the road in front of him. And people even took off their cloaks and put them down for Jesus to walk on. It was wonderful, beautiful, beautiful. And people were following him and listening to him throughout the week. We women stayed busy. And towards the end of the week, we got word that Jesus had been arrested. Well, by the time we heard, not only had he been arrested, but they had sentenced him to die on a cross. The most gruesome way to die. We couldn't believe it. We were distraught. We couldn't believe it. Our master, this person who had done nothing wrong, had to die. We had to go there. So we all went up to the cross at Golgotha. We went up there, dreading it, but we just had to be there, you know. Sure enough, we get up there, and here comes some men. Jesus was one of them. At first, I didn't even recognize him, my master that I'd followed for so long. He was bloodied and beaten and swollen, and they had whipped him and scourged him. They brought him up there, and he was in such pain already, and yet they laid him out on this crossbar, and they drove nails in his hands. And by nails, I don't mean nails, I mean nails, and both of his feet. And then they placed the cross, kaboom, at his whole body. Oh, the agony. It was awful. It was so awful. And he hung there, tortuously trying to breathe. We women just sat there or stood there. There was nothing we could do but watch and love him like he loved us. Love him from afar and cry. Much weeping. He stood there on that cross for so long. It seemed like forever. We didn't want him to die, but we didn't want him to suffer either. And finally, I remember his final words that he said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And he dropped his head, and he was gone. After a while, the crowds all left, but I stayed. I helped as they took him down off from the cross, and they washed his body, and they wrapped it in a large piece of material, much like a sheet. They wrapped his body, and then they carried him to a tomb. They carried him to a tomb not too far away, and I followed along. And they placed him inside the tomb, and then they rolled a big, heavy rock across the opening of the tomb. It was getting late in the day, and we needed to get back off the streets. The Sabbath was coming. And so we went back to our homes, and I don't remember what I did that night. We were all just lost in our own thoughts. How are we going to carry on without our master, our leader? What was going to happen with us? Much of the next day, the same thing, I don't remember. But at the end of the next day, at the end of the evening, we women got the oils and the perfumes and the ingredients to anoint the body for final burial. Bright and early the next day, before the sun hardly even came up, as soon as we could see, we headed right to the tomb, the women and I. You know, I was thinking on the way, how are we going to get that big heavy stone away from the tomb to go in there? But as we approached, the tomb had already been opened for us. As we went into the tomb, there was no body. Our master was gone, no body. That big piece of material that they had wrapped him in was there, but there was no Jesus. I just stood there for a while, just trying to make sense of it. Why would they take his body? We haven't anointed it yet. And I just took off running. I went back to Mark's house. I had to find the disciples and tell them maybe they could help. And so I took off running, and I ran, and when I got there I was crying. They've taken the Lord. They've taken his body. I don't know where they've taken him. And the disciples looked at me as if I'd gone crazy. Maybe I had. And then Peter and John got up, and they took off running. They were going to the tomb to find out for themselves, and I followed along. By the time Peter and I caught up to John, he had sort of waited for us, and the three of us went in together. John and Peter just stood there, shaking their heads. They didn't know what to do. We stood there in silence for a spell. And then slowly, John and Peter went back to Mark's house. I was left alone. I guess I lost it. I just fell to the ground. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to say. I was just weeping uncontrollably. You don't know the amount of agony that I had. Sobbing, my whole body was shaking. I don't know how long I was there. Agonies. After a while, I started to calm myself and quiet down, and I thought I heard someone coming up behind me, thinking it was probably the gardener coming to work. I didn't want him to know I was crying for whatever reason, so I was trying to compose myself, and I said, "Sir, please tell me where they've taken his body. I need to prepare it for the final burial. Please tell me where they've taken Jesus." And then I heard his voice, "Mary." I knew that voice. I turned around, and there was Jesus, whole and beautiful and smiling at me. My Lord, he's alive. I threw myself at his feet, and he said, "Mary, don't touch me. You know I'm here. You know I'm alive. You know I'm with you always. But I want you to know that one day you may not hear me. You may not hear me with with my own voice, with your ears. You may not see me. You may not feel me. But I will always be with you." And then he was gone again. But he wasn't really gone. He's always with me.